Welcome to Medieval History Channel 97, where the echoes of the past come alive. Step into the world of knights, castles, and forgotten legends as we journey through time together. Let history speak. Hey everyone. Tonight, we step into a world that's dark, dangerous, and far from the romantic fantasy we've seen in movies. The world of medieval assassins. Shadowy figures who crept through castle corridors and moonlit alleys, changing the course of history with nothing more than a whisper and a blade. It sounds thrilling, right? But here's the truth. Being a medieval assassin wasn't cool. It was a nightmare, a desperate, lonely, and often short-lived existence. Before we dive in, if you find value in what I do, feel free to like the video and subscribe, only if it truly resonates with you. Drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I always love seeing the little constellation of viewers lighting up across the world. Now, dim your lights, let the room settle, maybe turn on a fan for that soft, constant hum. Let's begin tonight's story. Let's get something straight. No one in the Middle Ages woke up one morning and said, "You know what? I think I'll stab a nobleman in the throat today for 12 silver coins and the honor of hiding in a wine barrel for 3 days." Being an assassin wasn't a career move. It was the last station on a train called Life Went Horribly Wrong. Most medieval assassins weren't noble loners trained in mountaintop temples. They were desperate peasants, disgraced soldiers, former thieves with decent aim, people so far beneath society's notice they could end a life and still not show up on the census. If you had money, you didn't become an assassin, you hired one. If you had land, a title, even just a goat, you had status, you gave orders. But if you just escaped debtor's prison, had a reputation for solving problems, and could sneak through a tavern unnoticed, then congratulations. Someone, somewhere, was about to slide a coin pouch across the table and whisper a name, and that name, it was never someone easy. No one asked you to kill Bob the quiet turnip farmer. It was a corrupt baron, a gold-drunk bishop, or someone with a private army and a moat full of very aggressive fish. The pay? Tempting. The job? Terrifying. But by the time someone considered it, they had nothing left to lose. No family, no future, and definitely no dental plan. Let's not forget the perks, because there weren't any. No pension, no glory, no evenings off. You couldn't hang a sign that said silent eliminations by appointment. You just had to stay quiet, move fast, and never ever admit what you did for a living, especially not over a mug of ale. "Oh yeah, I sell carpets. The stains, die." No one dreamed of being a medieval assassin. They ended up there, broken, discarded, stripped of every other choice. The world didn't train them. It chewed them up and spit them out, wearing a hood and holding a rusted dagger. They weren't the stars of grand ballads. They were the silence between the verses, the shadow that passed unnoticed, the name that history chose not to remember. And perhaps what's most haunting of all is that they were once just like us. You weren't a hero. You weren't even the villain. You were the footnote at the bottom of the page, the quiet line that made people uneasy. And maybe you didn't even live long enough to spend your first coin. Let's tear the myth apart from the beginning. There were no hidden monasteries lit by candlelight, no silver-haired mentors, no solemn flute music echoing in the background, no training montage, no guidance, no comforting speeches. If you learned anything, it was by not dying the first few times you tried. Most medieval assassins weren't trained professionals. They were desperate souls, shaky hands, pounding hearts who knew how to move through the dark without being noticed. And most importantly, they knew how to climb quietly if luck was on their side. If you had military experience, great. You knew how to hold a blade the right way. If not, didn't matter much. Stabbing is easy. Getting away afterward with both kidneys intact, that takes either skill or, more often, blind luck. There were no manuals, no guild orientations, no briefing on spotting body doubles or mapping noble escape routes. You figured it out while dangling from a windowsill, praying you hadn't crept into the servants' quarters again. And poison? Mostly trial, mostly error. Sometimes your target got woozy, sometimes they just frowned suspiciously at the soup. Sometimes you drank the wrong cup. There was no medieval poison hotline, just hope, some herbs, and a stomach willing to suffer for the job. If you were lucky, lottery lucky, you might have learned a thing or two from a thief or mercenary. Maybe some old assassin showed you how to walk without squeaking on cobblestones. But mentorship, it wasn't a given. It was rare. It was brief. Because assassins don't retire. They vanish. Weapons training? Forget it. You didn't carry a broadsword. You had a knife, stolen, most likely. Maybe a garrote, if you were feeling elegant. And whatever else could hide beneath your cloak without making a sound. So no, you weren't some mythical shadow dancer. You were a man with calloused hands, silent steps, and a deeply unhealthy relationship with alleyways. Success didn't come from training. It came from survival. You learned to kill by doing it, quickly, messily, then disappearing before someone could sketch your face and nail it to a church door. Your education didn't come with a diploma, only bruises, bloodstains, and the growing awareness that you were very, very alone. And why did you become an assassin in the first place? Coin, cold, heavy, jingling in your pocket like a promise. A single silver could keep you fed, a pouch of gold might buy your way out, and if luck ever stayed long enough, maybe, just maybe, you could escape the game before it swallowed you whole. It was the promise that pulled you in. The allure of it, quick silver, no ties, no masters, just a blade, a name, a silent night, and you'd be free. That was the fantasy. The reality, you were paid in lies. Because when someone hires an assassin, they don't want loyalty, they want a ghost. A shadow to do the unspoken, then vanish. No contract, no thanks, no loose ends, including you. They hand you a pouch of coins, half now, half later. If you live that long, but later is code for once we're sure you didn't botch it, once no one can trace it back to us, once you've conveniently disappeared. So you go. You risk your neck creeping through alleys, climbing walls, killing a noble in his bed. It's not glorious, it's not poetic, it's cold, quiet murder. And when you come back, exhausted, hungry, half dead, oh, the client fled. So sorry. Or worse, they send someone after you because a blade in the back costs less than a bonus, and even when they do pay, it's never enough. Not for the blood, not for the guilt, not for the 3 sleepless nights you spent curled in a haystack with fleas and a moral crisis. They give you a few coins, a cold nod, and a final word, you were never here. And sometimes the job itself was a lie, a political setup. You were sent to kill a dangerous figure, only to find a decoy flanked by guards. Surprise, you just walked into a sting with your name already carved on the gallows. And if you think you could fight it, try telling a judge, Your Honor, I'd like to sue Lord Edmund for breach of assassin contract. The only courtroom you'll see is the one where you're the main attraction at your own execution. So you learn. Take the money up front. Trust no one, not even the greasy scribe who swore this job would change your life. He was right. It did. It shortened it. Being an assassin means living on broken promises and disappearing before they break you. So here you are, the job's accepted, the lie's already told, the clock ticking. Let's talk gear. Forget the fantasy books and stealth games. There are no hidden blades, no enchanted daggers, no magic cloaks. You carry what you can steal, sharpen, and conceal beneath a cloak full of holes. Just like you. If you were lucky, and I mean the kind of luck where you find a gold coin in the shoe of a dead man, then you had yourself a good dagger. Not ornate, not curved like a dragon's tooth, just sharp, not rusty. And if fortune truly favored you, it didn't reek of the last soul it had tasted. Poison? Yes, it existed. But forget the slow drip elegance into a goblet of wine. Reality was far messier. Extracted from roots, minerals, sometimes toad guts, poisons were as unpredictable as the people who brewed them. Some killed in seconds. Some took hours. Some just made a man vomit for 2 days and wake up furious and suddenly very wary of stew. Rope? Occasionally helpful. To strangle, to climb, to bind. But you had to know your knots. There's nothing more humiliating than wrestling someone in the dark while muttering, wait, which loop goes under again? Bows? Sure, effective if you had one, knew how to shoot, and somehow managed to smuggle it into a palace while pretending to be a flower arranger. But most assassinations were up close. Very close. No time for elegance or grace. Just a single, quiet moment and a desperate hope that you wouldn't slip in the blood that followed. You didn't get second chances. If your blade bent, broke, or tumbled down a well, then it was time to improvise. A roof tile, a rusty nail, a shoe buckle wielded with conviction. Desperation made for strange weapons and stranger victories. You hid your tools in hems and boots, sometimes inside hollowed bread. Not out of fear, out of necessity. Because in this line of work, your weapon wasn't just your tool, it was your friend, your boss, and your last-ditch exit strategy. There were no upgrades, no polishing between missions. You didn't sharpen steel. You prayed it wouldn't fail you when it mattered most. Because in the end, the weapon didn't do the killing. You did, alone, under-equipped, and expected to work miracles with a spoon-and-a-half breath of prayer. Assassins weren't paid to gut drunks in candlelit alleys. You weren't hired to stab Jeff, the sleepy candlemaker. Your targets were nobles, bishops, commanders, sometimes kings. And those were not easy to kill. First came the guards, not one or two, dozens, armed, armored, well-fed. Some stood at the gates, some flanked the halls, some just stared, daring you to breathe wrong. You spent days learning their patterns, counting footsteps, memorizing which stair creaked, noting exactly when the wheezing knight paused to catch his breath. Then there were the walls. Castles didn't have porches. They had gatehouses, murder holes, and moats full of teeth. Even if you didn't drown, you'd face arrow slits and boiling oil. Yes, boiling oil. Your job description might as well include likely to be flambéed for curiosity. And finally, the staff, the cooks, the scribes, the stable boys. One suspicious glance and suddenly everyone's whispering to the captain of the guard. Assassins didn't just battle blades, they battled gossip. And in medieval times, gossip traveled faster than light, especially when it could save someone's neck. And finally, your real target, paranoid, and for good reason. These people lived in a fortress of fear, surrounded by schemers, cousins with royal ambitions, and a banquet hall full of smiles sharpened like daggers. They never ate without a taster. They never slept without 3 locks on their doors. Some even rotated sleeping quarters, laying their heads in different beds each night, like a deadly game of musical chairs. And if you thought a royal feast was your chance, think again. Yes, they'd be drunk, but so would you. And before you even got close, you'd have to pass royal guards, 3 trained hounds, a hyper-aware jester, and 50 half-drunk nobles holding heavy mugs and sharp instincts. Just getting close could take weeks. Disguising yourself as a servant, bribing a chambermaid, hiding in a barrel, and praying no one needed more wine. And when the moment finally came, you had only one shot. One silent, precise, bloodless, vanish into the night kind of shot. Miss it, and you'd be next, swinging from the castle gate with a wooden sign creaking in the wind. Nice try. We all imagine a medieval assassin wrapped in shadow, sleek black robes, leather bracers, a hood dancing in moonlight. But reality? You looked like a sickly goat herder with secrets to hide. Disguises weren't stylish. You didn't have tailored cloaks or hidden blades. You had whatever you could steal off a corpse, peasant rags soaked in mud, a monk's robe 2 sizes too big, or a guard's uniform that still reeked of its last owner. Blending in meant becoming invisible, but invisibility looked like filth. 2 weeks unbathed, limping from old wounds, hands trembling from hunger. You weren't suspicious because of your cloak. You were suspicious because you kept fidgeting with your belt, adjusting the dagger wrapped in oily cheesecloth. Forget masks, there was no Guy Fawkes option. The best you had might make you look like a leper, which helped avoid questions but ruined your chances of crashing a noble's party. And if someone asked who you were, you had seconds to respond. I'm Brother Tobias. I handle silent prayer and rooftop maintenance. Even if you got past the guards, noble households weren't full of fools. Servants remembered faces. One misstep, like spilling a chamber pot or forgetting the cook's cat's name, and it was over. You were always one confused glance away from a candlestick to the skull. And if the disguise worked, congratulations. Now you had to hold character for hours, smiling, nodding, bowing, while resisting every urge to lunge at the dozens of very stab-worthy necks walking by. As for wigs, none existent. Need to look older? Smear dirt on your face, squint, and hope no one notices your beard is glued on with honey. Being a medieval assassin wasn't romantic. It was exhaustion wrapped in rags. It was tension stitched into every breath. It was hunger, filth, paranoia, and isolation. No legends, no glory. Just a desperate man pretending to belong in a world waiting to kill him the moment if you succeeded. If you disappeared into the night with your soul intact, the only thing you took with you was the weight of what you had done, and the silence that followed you for the rest of your life. The truth is, a disguise never truly protected you. At best, it bought you a few fleeting minutes of confusion, just long enough for someone to hesitate, to blink, to doubt. After that, you had to be gone, vanished. Or else you had to be so convincing that even the gods questioned their own judgment. Because if anyone saw through the illusion, well, imagine being the assassin caught in a bishop's laundry room, wearing a nun's habit and holding a sword on a feast day. That's not a death you write songs about. In medieval times, if you were an assassin, you were alone. You didn't have a partner with a silent crossbow or a quirky alchemist brewing poisons in a secret den. No handler sending warm encouragement through coded scrolls, no safe houses, no rescue plans. It was just you, a rusty dagger, and trust issues so deep they touched bone. The whispers of brotherhoods? Mostly drunken tavern tales born from boredom and too much mead. In reality, you were more likely to encounter a ghost than another killer who wanted to network. Why? Because in your line of work, the fewer people who knew you existed, the longer you lived. Every contact was a gamble. Every word risked a slip. Even your client didn't always know your name. And if they did, you were already plotting your disappearance. Companionship? A joke. Friends asked questions. Lovers noticed bruises, the smell of blood, the blade beneath your pillow. You couldn't settle. You weren't allowed to. One wrong glance in a market square, one face that recognized yours, and your entire life became a desperate sprint toward the nearest sewer grate. Even fellow criminals kept their distance. Thieves and smugglers were social creatures. You were the shadow in their nightmares, the one who made people vanish. They feared you. Or worse, they saw you as a walking catastrophe. No one wanted to share a meal with someone whose presence could invite a mob with torches and rope. And don't expect sympathy. You couldn't admit how it felt to strangle a corrupt bishop in the quiet dark. Couldn't confess that the silence afterward was louder than any scream. If you talked about your work, people either thought you were mad or dangerous, and they weren't wrong. So you carried your secrets like weapons. You wore your scars like armor. You said nothing, trusted no one, and moved like mist. At inns, you always sat with your back to the wall. Your eyes never left the door. You never drank too much, never stayed 2 nights in the same place. You didn't give your name unless silver crossed the table, and even then, it probably wasn't your real one. Being a medieval assassin wasn't just about killing, it was about disappearing. Not just into crowds, but from every life you never got to live. You didn't just lose your name. You had to forget the person you might have been. Imagine this, you took the job. You mapped every alley, timed every guard rotation. You slipped silver into the right hand. You dressed the part, just a humble chimney sweep with soot in your hair and silence in your steps. And then you froze. Maybe the target turned too soon. Maybe they were holding their child's hand. Or maybe in the one moment that mattered, your hand betrayed you, trembling like a squirrel trapped in a storm. And that meant death. Not a quiet, merciful death, but a spectacle, a slow, brutal unraveling of flesh and bone in front of a roaring crowd. Ropes, flames, iron wheels, devices with names like the Bonecracker's Delight that turned pain into performance. One mistake, and everything collapsed. Your target lived, and within seconds they screamed, "Assassin!" Now you're not a shadow, you're a face, a name, a sketch on every tavern wall, and those lazy guards you once slipped past, now they have purpose. But sometimes, the real danger wasn't your mark, it was your client. Because when you fail, you're no longer an asset, you're a liability. A loose thread someone might pull, a tortured whisper, a broken body that knows too much. And the person who once paid you now pays someone else to find you. Fast. There are no do-overs here. No, sorry, the blade slipped. No, I'll try again tomorrow. You had one shot, one breath. And if you missed, the best you could hope for was a quiet death before anyone learned who hired you. And then there's the shame, the quiet kind, the kind that eats you from the inside out. You didn't just fail to kill, you failed to disappear, you failed to be perfect. And in this world, perfection isn't just a goal, it's survival. Anything less might as well paint a target on your back and give you time to write your last words. No one cares about your past victories. You could have killed a dozen kings, doesn't matter. In this profession, you're only as good as your last kill. And if your last kill didn't happen, you'd better start running. But let's say it worked. The plan unfolded like clockwork. The dagger struck clean, no scream, no struggle. Just a soft collapse and a very important person who suddenly wasn't. Congratulations, now run. Because being a successful assassin in medieval times didn't mean sipping wine on a rooftop while the city burned behind you. It meant sprinting through back alleys with someone's blood soaking into your boots and a dog already sniffing the scent of your fear. There was no victory lap, no celebration, no friendly debrief, not even a second to admire your work. The instant your blade met flesh, your new mission began. Escape, because the moment you killed someone, the world came alive, and it was coming for you. The doors were locked, the guards were coming, your horse tied up on the other side of town. You were probably bleeding, but there was no time to check. In that razor-thin moment, right after the kill, right before the chaos, you survived only because you'd prepared. Escape routes, disguises, fallback hideouts, maybe a boatman who owed you a favor, or just didn't ask questions. Because in minutes, the city would shut down. Gates sealed, checkpoints armed, and a dozen furious men with swords, all carrying a rough sketch of your face, and the phrase, possibly armed and extremely stat. And the client, assuming they ever intended to pay you, they'd be gone too. No warm handshake, no coin at the tavern. Because everyone knows, once the job is done, the deadliest person in the city is you. You know too much. You've proven you can go where no one else can. Now you're not just a killer, you're a liability. So what did you win? A bloodstained pouch of silver and a target on your back. A week of sleeping in goat-stinking haylofts, bribing ferry captains, shaving in the dark, and murmuring Brother Lucian every time someone asked your name. Because success doesn't mean survival. It means starting over. New city, new identity, this time with even more eyes hunting you. Yes, the kill is done. Now run. Run like hell, because sometimes hell is chasing you back. And as if that wasn't enough, being poor, hunted, and sleeping in places where rats were the locals, you also had to contend with medieval paranoia. Back then, an assassin wasn't just feared, you were cursed. To the average peasant, you weren't just a hooded killer, you were something unholy. A shadow who whispered to demons, smeared frog guts on your blade, and disappeared under a full moon. How else could you slip past guards or vanish in the dark? Logic didn't stand a chance. But superstition? Oh, that ruled everything. Some believed you could shapeshift. Others swore you were invisible unless doused in holy water. Because being a medieval assassin wasn't just dangerous, it was lonely, terrifying, and always, always on borrowed time. They say some assassins made pacts with forest spirits, shadowy figures who could breathe death through stone walls. In some forgotten village, as you passed by, a woman might clutch her baby tighter and whisper, "Don't look him in the eye. He could curse the child." You didn't have to do anything terrible. Just carry a dagger, and they'd swear it was forged in a cursed fire. Use poison? Clearly not chemistry, but witchcraft. And someone would always claim you stirred it with a severed toe under a blood moon. You'd think fear might shield you, that people would stay away, keep their distance. But fear doesn't protect, it provokes. Superstitious mobs don't hesitate. They don't need proof, just a spark of suspicion. Then come the stones, the flames, and the shouts from another age. Burn him before he calls down lightning. Your reputation made death easy. The moment someone died unexpectedly, an illness, a fall, choking on a chicken bone, whispers would rise. Maybe it was the Shadow Man. Maybe it was him. To live was to flee. Always. Stay too long and the church bell would toll while 5 farmers approached, gripping pitchforks like they'd been waiting for this day their whole lives. And heaven help you if they found anything strange on you. A bundle of herbs, an odd coin, a foreign accent. Enough to cry, "Sorcerer!" and light the torch. In a world that believed monsters wore human faces, being too quiet, too clever, or too different made you dangerous. And in medieval logic, danger had to die. Quickly, preferably in flames. Ah, poison, the assassin's weapon of elegance, a death without screams, no steel, no struggle, just a sip, a stagger, a sigh, and silence. That's the theory. In reality, poisoning someone in the Middle Ages was like trying to win a bar fight with herbal tea and a bad attitude. You didn't have neat vials of cyanide or sleek little pills labeled instant death. You had plants, fungi, minerals, maybe the occasional toad. You had to grind, brew, and hope. And even then, the result might just give your target an upset stomach and a newfound devotion to hiring more bodyguards. There were no precise measurements. You guessed. A pinch too little, and he vomits and cancels the banquet. A pinch too much, and you die before the main course. And medieval kitchens? Chaos. You didn't just stroll in and sprinkle nightshade on the stew. You bribed a cook, impersonated a servant, or worst of all, tried to tamper with food meant to be tasted by 3 testers and a dog. Yes, a dog. And if your target was nobility, mealtimes weren't meals. They were military operations. Being an assassin wasn't just about skill. It was about carrying the weight of fear, being hunted not for what you did, but for what people imagined you could do. You weren't death itself, but in an age ruled by superstition, by fire and fear, you were close enough. A noble's meal was never just a meal. It was a ritual, each dish tasted, blessed, and sniffed by everyone from the steward to the court jester. Before a single bite reached the lips of royalty, it had passed through more layers of scrutiny than a royal wedding procession. So imagine you succeed. You slip the poison in. No one notices. The target eats it. And then, nothing is certain. Some poisons take hours, others, days. One moment they're laughing at a joke, the next, they're doubled over in pain, demanding a physician, or worse, their astrologer. And if they survive, they won't blame the cook or the taster. They'll blame you, the quiet man with sharp eyes and a suspicious knowledge of herbs. Poisoning wasn't precise, it wasn't clean. It was a gamble, slow, unpredictable, and riddled with variables that never played in your favor. And if you were caught, you didn't get a clean death. You got dragged into a stone chamber and introduced to tools that spoke a language of pain. You'd confess to every death from the Duke to his hunting hound just to make it stop. You'd think that if you succeeded, if you removed a tyrant, shattered a royal bloodline, or stopped a war before it began, someone might remember your name. But no. You were an assassin. Your name was never meant to be remembered. At best, you were a shadow in a tavern tale, a hooded figure, a silent man who never finished his drink. You could pull off the most legendary hit of the century and still be recorded as a mysterious death in a dusty ledger. And that was the point. Your client didn't want a story. They wanted silence. The fewer people who knew who did it, the safer they were, the less likely they were to wake up with your knife at their own throat. So the moment your task was done, your identity was buried with it. If you even used your real name to begin with, you didn't sign your work, you didn't boast, you didn't keep trophies, you didn't exist beyond the moment of the kill. And if someone knew who you were, that was a loose end, and loose ends never lived long in your world. Forget about honor. There were no medals for silence. No monuments for the man who stopped a war with one blade in the night. If a noble wanted a statue, they commissioned one for themselves. You got a wooden box, an unmarked grave, or if things went truly wrong, a head on a pike labeled traitor. Sometimes your name survived only as a curse. You became a warning, whispered in dark halls, "Don't cross the king, remember what happened to Lord Ulrich?" Yes. And the man who did it? Gone. Like a ghost. That was your legacy. Not glory, not fear, just absence. You weren't meant to leave a mark. You were meant to disappear. And if you somehow stuck around long enough to become known, that was your death sentence. Because in the medieval world, heroes got remembered. Assassins, they got erased. You survived the kill, you got the job done, you even managed to get paid, a rare miracle in itself. Now all that's left is to lay low, keep your head down, and trust that your client will honor the deal and protect your identity. Right? Wrong. In the shadowy realm of medieval assassination, there was a rule far more sacred than don't get caught. Never trust anyone, especially not the person paying you. Your client, whether a noble, a merchant, or a bishop dripping with ambition and loose morals, didn't hire you out of respect. They hired you because they needed something ugly done, and you were the sharpest blade lurking in the dark. Once the deed was done, you became a liability. You knew too much. Who wanted whom dead, when, why, and often how much they were willing to pay. That knowledge made you dangerous, not just to their enemies, but to them. So what happened next? They vanished, denied ever knowing you. Or worse, they sent another assassin to clean up the loose end, you. There were chilling tales of clients who double-booked, hiring one assassin for the kill and another to kill the first immediately after. No refunds, just risk management. If you had the audacity to blackmail your client, threaten exposure. That was bold. And also your last mistake, because in the medieval power game, rich and ruthless people didn't negotiate with assassins. They crushed them. If your client had an ounce of honor, a rarity, you might get paid and left alone. But even then, you could bet they were watching from the shadows, with someone sharpening a blade and memorizing your every step. You were the secret that could never speak, the shadow that could never linger. Even success wasn't enough to earn trust, because in their eyes, if you killed once, you could kill again. And no one, not even the person who hired you, wanted to be next. Now imagine this. Against all odds, you survived the kills, the lies, the poisonings and betrayals. You outlived your enemies, your employers, and maybe even your own fading sense of morality. Now what? You retire? Absolutely not. Because in medieval times, assassins didn't get retirement plans. No farewell banquets, no peaceful cottages by the sea, no pensions paid in gold coins and whispered gratitude. You didn't fade into a quiet life. You vanished, or you died. Often both. The problem was simple. You were never safe. Even if you walked away from the job, your past never walked away from you. Too many secrets burned in your mind, too many names etched into your memory, too much blood stained your hands. No one wanted you retired, they wanted you forgotten, which usually meant buried deep and silent. And even if no one came after you, and that's a big if, you had to live with the gnawing fear that someone might. That a new assassin, young and hungry to prove himself, had just been handed a contract to silence the shadow you once cast. So you changed your name again. You moved to a nameless village where eyes didn't pry. You faked a limp, sold herbs, claimed you were once a guard. But sleep became a stranger. You avoided crowds like they were hunting dogs, always sat facing the door, dagger hidden beneath the floorboard. Next to the pouch of coins you never dared touch, because it still smelled of the man who paid you in blood. You couldn't even trust yourself. Years of silent kills and breathless escapes rewired your mind. Every knock at the door made your heart leap. Every stranger on the road might recognize the ghost you tried to bury. Dreams stopped coming because dreaming was a dangerous luxury. Love, relaxation, laughter, those were luxuries for the living, not for ghosts like you. You lived as a shadow pretending to be a man. The truth, there was no happy ending for a medieval assassin. Just a slow, cold fade into oblivion. Always moving, always watching. Until one day, you slipped into the dark and no one noticed. Maybe that was the best you could hope for. By now, you've probably figured it out. Being a medieval assassin wasn't romantic or noble, it wasn't glamorous or even especially profitable. It was a grim, thankless, short-lived existence, wrapped in blood-stained linen and shadowed by the threat of death. A life chased by whispers and knives. You wouldn't last long, not a week, maybe not even a day, because you'd start with the wrong ideas. You'd imagine yourself sleek, in control, a whisper in the dark. But really, you were cold. You were hungry. One bad guess away from the noose. You'd slip into town, cloak pulled tight, ready for the kill, only to find your target moved without warning. The guards are drunk, but jittery and dangerous. The stable boy you bribed sold you out for a mug of ale and a crust of bread. You freeze at the wrong moment, stab the wrong man, get caught by a servant who once glimpsed your face near the chapel. And suddenly, you're no longer just a shadow in the night. You become the problem. What next? You run, desperately, clumsily. But you're not built for this medieval world. The mud sucks at your boots, uneven cobblestones twist your ankles, and everywhere loose chickens dart in your path, forcing you off balance. You slip, you fall. And then, just as you scramble up, a guard named Thomas tackles you to the ground, a man with a broken heart and a hunger for violence. If you survive that, you face what comes after. No friends, no honor, no future, only whispers that follow you like ghosts, suspicion thick in the air, and the crushing truth, even if you succeed, your best hope is to die alone and forgotten, hiding behind a false name in some village where they still believe in fairies. So, no, you wouldn't last long. And honestly, you shouldn't even try. Because the assassin's life isn't glamorous. It's a merciless machine, grinding people into dust, spitting out nothing but empty shadows. It offers power without peace, purpose without belonging. You don't make history, you erase yourself from it. And at the end, only silence waits. A silence so complete no one remembers you ever existed. Before she became the feared queen of Macedonia, Olympias was known as Myrtle, a Molossian princess from the wild, tribal lands of Epirus. Her people claimed to be descendants of Achilles himself. Whether or not heroic blood truly ran in her veins, one thing was clear: this woman was never meant to stand on history's sidelines. From a young age, Myrtle was enveloped in mystery and ritual, not just politics, but prophecy, ecstatic rites, and devotion to ancient gods. She was no delicate princess stitching tapestries in sunlit halls. Instead, she was drawn to serpents, omens, and the wild ceremonies of Dionysus, where women danced barefoot beneath the moon or summoning the divine through trance. Her bond with the gods wasn't performance, it was real, visceral. She didn't merely worship, she embodied their power. Ancient sources, likely penned by men both terrified and fascinated, claim she kept sacred snakes in her chambers, letting them coil beside her in bed. Whether truth or slander, the stories stuck. To allies, she was divine. To enemies, she was dangerous. Her true power wasn't on battlefields or throne rooms. It flickered in torchlight shadows, whispered among priestesses, and slithered in serpents' coils. She was not just a princess, she was a living oracle, touched by forces older than politics and colder than steel. So when Philip II of Macedon, brutal, brilliant, and famously lustful, arrived at Samothrace for his religious initiation, he didn't just meet a beautiful princess. He met a mystery he couldn't resist. Their marriage wasn't merely political, it was a collision of prophecy and power. From the very start, it was marked by omens. Lightning cleaved the sky on their wedding night. Olympias dreamed of a thunderbolt entering her womb. These signs would become legend. But one truth remains: the union of Olympias and Philip created more than a child. It created Alexander the Great, and Olympias meant to shape his destiny from the very first breath. Their marriage was far from a fairy tale. It was a volatile mix of prophecy, pride, and paranoia. Philip, ruthless, magnetic, and a collector of wives like trophies, married Olympias around 357 BCE. Though likely just a teenager, she was far from naive. She saw in Philip a man whose ambition matched her own, perhaps even a divine counterpart to her spiritual fate. Macedon was no easy kingdom, a land forged in iron and ambition, where kings were murdered by cousins and brothers became enemies overnight. Yet Olympias, the priestess of Epirus, entered with head held high and eyes fixed firmly on the crown. Their marriage was tumultuous from the very beginning. Philip, despite his sharp political mind, was never cut out for monogamy. Throughout his life, he would wed several women, each marriage a calculated move to secure alliances and wield power. But Olympias was no passive figure lurking in the background. She ruled her own court, nurtured her own network of alliances, and frequently turned to oracles and ancient rites to glimpse her future, and perhaps to glimpse Philip's fate. Then came Alexander's birth, surrounded by celestial portent and myth. Legends tell of Olympias dreaming that a thunderbolt struck her womb, flames encircling her unborn child without harming him. Philip himself supposedly envisioned a lion sealing his wife's womb, a vivid symbol of strength and dominion. Whether they truly believed these visions or conjured them to inspire awe, both acted as though Alexander was destined to rule not just a kingdom, but the entire known world. Yet, as the child was celebrated, the cracks in their royal marriage deepened. Olympias harbored bitter resentment toward Philip's other wives, particularly his later Macedonian bride, Cleopatra Eurydice. This was far more than jealousy. Cleopatra's Macedonian birth gave her son a legitimacy in the eyes of the native nobility that threatened Alexander's claim. Olympias recognized this danger with clear eyes. The palace was no mere home, it was a battleground, and she wielded every tool, every serpent's hiss, every whispered prophecy, every sacred ritual to ensure her son would not only be remembered, but crowned. She had shed the identity of Myrtle. She was Olympias now, and no one would claim her son's throne without first facing her wrath. By the time Alexander reached his teenage years, the palace in Pella was a war zone of subtle insults, political stratagems, and bitter rivalries. Olympias was not simply vying for influence, she was fighting for survival. She knew the court teemed with vipers, but she was the one who taught them how to strike. Philip II began to distance himself from her, spending more time on campaign, indulging in drink, and worst of all, heeding the advice of his Macedonian counselors over hers. The final blow came with his marriage to young Cleopatra Eurydice, not to be confused with the famous Cleopatra of Egypt. This Cleopatra, born of Macedonian blood and niece to Attalus, one of Philip's top generals, was a declaration of war in Olympias's eyes. The wedding feast turned into a fiasco. Drunk and insolent, Attalus publicly mocked Olympias and Alexander, even casting doubt on Alexander's paternity. Was Alexander truly Philip's son, or, as Olympias claimed, was he the child of a god? What was meant as an insult only served to ignite Olympias's fierce resolve. She seized the myth, weaving it into the very fabric of her son's destiny. Let them whisper, let them believe her son was touched by Zeus. It made him untouchable. Alexander stormed out of the feast. Olympias left Macedon entirely, retreating to Epirus. But her exile wasn't defeat, it was strategy. In her homeland, she was still royalty. She could gather support, whisper in ears, and watch as Philip's palace began to rot from within. She didn't need to be physically present to be dangerous. Then came the shockwave. Philip was assassinated at his daughter's wedding, just as he was about to invade Persia. Just as he was on the verge of crowning himself not just king of Macedon, but potential emperor of the known world. The question echoed through every marble corridor and torch-lit hall. Who did it? Was it Pausanias, the jilted bodyguard who carried out the act? Was it the result of court intrigue? Was it Alexander himself? Or, whisper it softly, was it Olympias? No one could prove it. No one dared, but many believed it. After all, within days, Cleopatra Eurydice and her newborn child were dead. Murdered, some say, by Olympias herself. The serpent had returned to the palace, and now nothing stood between her son and the throne. With Philip dead and Macedon in mourning, or confusion, Olympias made her move. While others scrambled to understand the chaos, she acted swiftly, brutally, decisively. First, Cleopatra Eurydice, the young Macedonian queen and rival wife, was eliminated. According to chilling accounts, Olympias didn't just have her killed. She made her death symbolic, public, humiliating. Some say Cleopatra was forced to hang herself after watching her infant daughter be murdered. Others claim Olympias had the child thrown onto a funeral pyre. What's agreed upon is this: no mercy was shown. Olympias understood what many mothers in ancient courts refused to accept. In a royal palace, mercy is a liability. A rival child, no matter how small, is a future war. And Olympias was done playing defense. With Cleopatra and her bloodline erased, she could now turn her attention to securing Alexander's throne. Her teenage son, bold, brilliant, already trained by Aristotle, was declared king without serious opposition. But don't be fooled. It wasn't just his charisma or his father's legacy that made it possible. It was Olympias. She knew which generals to threaten, which nobles to flatter, and which enemies to quietly remove. She wasn't just protecting her son's rise, she was engineering it. Alexander himself didn't always approve. He reportedly disapproved of the violence against Cleopatra's family, but he also didn't stop it, because deep down he knew what Olympias had always known. Power demands blood, and in Macedon, bloodlines were both a blessing and a curse. With her son now king, Olympias began to recede slightly from public life. But this was no retirement. She simply shifted from open strikes to whispered influence. As Alexander prepared to launch his conquest of Persia, she remained behind, not as a passive queen mother, but as the spiritual guardian of his destiny. She sent him sacred relics, consulted oracles, and performed rituals on his behalf to Olympus. Her son's mission wasn't merely military, it was divine. Alexander wasn't going to war, he was fulfilling prophecy. And as long as she breathed, no rival, Macedonian, Persian, or otherwise, would derail that sacred plan. She had crowned her son, she had purified the palace. Now from behind the curtain, she would guard his empire with fierce resolve. As Alexander marched east to conquer the known world, Olympias remained in Macedon, a queen without a throne, yet far from powerless. Her official title was Queen Mother, but make no mistake, she ruled in all but name. Though regency was technically entrusted to Antipater, one of Alexander's trusted generals, Olympias refused to be sidelined. She wrote to her son incessantly, advising, warning, sometimes chastising him. These were no tender notes from a doting mother. They were sharp political briefings, laced with oracles and venom. Thousands of miles away, Alexander read every word. She reminded him who his true enemies were. She questioned the loyalty of his companions. She criticized his fascination with Persian customs, his choice of wives, and his flirtation with divinity. No one else dared say these things, but Olympias spoke boldly. as a mother and priestess of divine will. Back in Macedon, Antipater grew increasingly resentful. Olympias undermined him at every turn. She wielded her status, religious authority, and family ties to stir opposition against him. Her influence stretched through Epirus, Thessaly, and the aristocracy. She spread rumors like wildfire, each whisper more deadly than a sword. Meanwhile, her letters to Alexander grew urgent. She warned of Antipater's ambition, painting him as a second Philip, ready to betray and usurp. Whether from belief or fear of losing power, she pressed her son to act. Alexander hesitated. He needed Antipater to maintain order in Greece while he fought in Asia. So the rift between mother and general deepened. Olympias watched and waited, but beneath her religious robes and maternal concern, impatience simmered. She hadn't endured years of palace warfare to be overshadowed by an aging soldier. As Alexander's empire stretched from the Aegean to India, Olympias saw cracks forming. He took on too much, trusted too many foreign advisors, and drifted from the mother and gods who made him. She believed his victories came from divine favor, and from her. If he forgot that, Olympias knew how to remind kings who they truly were, even if that king was her own son. When news of Alexander's death in Babylon reached Macedon in 323 BCE, it didn't arrive like a trumpet. It arrived like a dagger. For Olympias, it wasn't just the loss of a son, it was the collapse of a world she had spent decades building. Her boy, the divine storm she had prophesied, raised, unleashed, was gone, and he'd left behind no clear heir, no single successor, only chaos. The mighty empire he carved out was already fracturing. Generals, his so-called successors, were already dividing it up like jackals around a corpse. Antipater still held power in Macedon and Greece, and he had no love for Olympias. Worse, her daughter Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, was being courted by rival generals for marriage. Each one hoped to use her bloodline as a claim to the throne. Olympias saw what was coming. Civil war wasn't a possibility. It was inevitable, and once again she would have to act. But she no longer had Alexander. What she had instead was his bloodline, his young son, Alexander IV, born to Roxana, the Bactrian princess Alexander had married. Roxana, still in Macedon, was vulnerable. The boy was even more so. Olympias recognized that the infant was now the last true piece of her son's legacy. That made him a target, but it also made him a weapon. She allied herself with Roxana and the boy, determined to protect them and use the child's birthright to stake her own claim in the political battlefield. But the tide was turning. The generals who once bowed to Alexander had no interest in kneeling to his widow or his mother. They had armies now, ambitions and grudges. Olympias didn't flinch. She'd faced snakes, traitors, and kings. A few warlords with crowns and stolen spears wouldn't scare her. So she plotted. She waited. She watched as Antipater died and was replaced by his son, Cassander, a man with ice in his veins and no tolerance for the old queen's games. It was only a matter of time before these two forces collided. The serpent mother of Alexander and the cold-eyed user who wanted her buried. Alexander was gone, but his shadow was still moving, and Olympias was still coiled within it, ready to strike. Years after Alexander's death, while his empire crumbled into civil war, Olympias made her most audacious move yet. She returned to Macedon, not as a grieving mother, but as a political force of divine fury. The regency had splintered. Cassander, the son of her old enemy Antipater, was seizing power, and Roxana, along with young Alexander IV, was effectively imprisoned. Olympias saw the writing on the wall. If she did not act now, her grandson would vanish like a shadow at dusk. So she made a deal with Polyperchon, an aging general who still held a flicker of legitimate authority. Olympias would return, not to plead, but to rule. With Polyperchon's backing, she entered Macedon at the head of an army. And the moment her feet touched home soil, everything changed. Towns opened their gates, soldiers defected to her side. Even some of her old enemies hesitated. Olympias, despite her age, was still a name that shook the ground. Then came her vengeance. One by one, she hunted down the loyalists of Cassander, and when she finally caught Philip III Aridaeus, Alexander's mentally impaired half-brother and puppet king, she ordered his execution. According to some sources, his wife Eurydice was captured and given the opportunity to kill herself. When she refused, Olympias had her strangled. It was brutality veiled in royal protocol. And Olympias, ever theatrical, staged the scene like a goddess delivering justice. Her message was clear. Only the bloodline of Alexander had the right to rule. Everyone else was a pretender. For a brief, burning moment, Olympias held the kingdom in her grip. She had restored the dynasty, she had avenged betrayals, she had reminded Macedon what royal power looked like, wielded by a woman with nothing left to lose. But power in Macedon was like fire in dry grass, and Cassander was still out there, calculating, biding his time. He returned with a vengeance. His army outnumbered hers, his resources ran deeper, his cruelty was colder. Her allies began to abandon her. Polyperchon lost influence. The tide turned. Olympias, now isolated in the fortress of Pydna, watched as her enemies closed in. She had lit the match. Macedon had burned, and now the smoke was thick and her enemies were at the gates. Olympias, once the most feared woman in the ancient world, now found herself besieged in the coastal fortress of Pydna, alone, cut off, surrounded by the army of Cassander, who had come to finish what his father had started. But Olympias didn't beg. She didn't plead. For nearly a year, she endured the siege like a statue carved from divine wrath. Food ran short, disease crept in, allies vanished. Yet within the fortress walls, she maintained unshakable presence that had once shaken kings. To the very end, she carried herself not as a prisoner, but as the mother of a god. Cassander, ever cautious, hesitated. He knew killing Olympias was dangerous. Even now, she carried a myth around her like armor. She was still the mother of Alexander the Great. To strike her down might seem like blasphemy. So he offered her safety. Surrender, he said, and her life would be spared. Olympias knew better. She had witnessed countless royal promises crumble into ash. Yet hunger was no longer a mere discomfort. It was a sentence to death. Her garrison faltered. Her followers surrendered. And Olympia, unyielding until the very end, was finally handed over to her enemies. Cassander did not kill her himself. That would have been too simple, too merciful. Instead, he delivered her to the families of those she had executed during her brief resurgence of power. Let them decide her fate. They condemned her to death. But here's the twist. When the executioners arrived, no one dared strike the first blow. Olympia stood tall, regal and silent, her eyes fixed on them like an oracle peering through smoke. These were Macedonians. They had grown up hearing tales of her rituals, her visions, her serpents. They had once cheered her son as a living god. And now here she was, a frail old woman cloaked in myth. Not a single man had the courage to swing the sword. So Cassander sent others, foreigners, outsiders, people with no memory of her power, only orders to obey. And so Olympia was finally struck down, not with ceremony, not with dignity, but with silence. Her death marked the end of Alexander's bloodline in any meaningful power. With it, the final ember of an empire born from divine ambition was extinguished. Yet even in death, Olympia cast a shadow. History would never forget the Serpent Queen. Olympia died not on a throne, but in dust, unarmed, abandoned, executed by the very people she once ruled. But history is strange. It does not always favor those who die wrapped in silk sheets. Sometimes it remembers those who fall with a hiss. Olympia was never meant for quiet history. In life, she wielded motherhood like a sword and prophecy like a shield. She wasn't just Alexander the Great's mother. She was one of the architects of his ascent. Without her, there would be no myth of the divine child, no rituals whispering thunderbolts and lions, no ruthless purges clearing the path for a teenage king to command the known world. Olympia didn't merely give birth to an empire, she defended it with claws. Even among the ancient world's most ruthless dynasts, she stands apart. She didn't lead armies into battle like Cleopatra or ride at the front like Boudica. Her battlefield was subtler, colder, a realm of poisoned chalices, political marriages, priestesses, and oracles. She understood fear's power and, more importantly, belief's power. She made people believe her son was divine, and perhaps she believed it too. Her enemies branded her a murderer, witch, manipulator, and they were not wrong. Olympia was all these and more. She was the product of a brutal world that revered cunning over kindness. And she learned early that mercy was a luxury queens could not afford. In centuries that followed, she was both vilified and mythologized. Some called her a villain, others a visionary, but no historian, ancient or modern, could ever call her irrelevant. She haunted Alexander's legacy like a shadow, always lurking in the background, just beyond the curtain. And maybe that's exactly where she was meant to be. Not as a tragic mother or a footnote in a king's tale, but as a story all her own. a woman wrapped in prophecy who slept beside snakes and outlived gods. Olympia's bones turned to dust long ago. Yet her legend lives on in every tale of ruthless queens, in every whisper of blood-bound destiny, in every empire built on myth. She is still there, coiled in the dark, waiting. On the sun-bleached island of Crete, just a few miles south of modern Heraklion, lies a ruin that feels more like a dream than a place. Stone corridors twist and snake in all directions. Rooms fold back on themselves. Staircases lead nowhere. Even today, it's easy to lose your way. This place is Knossos, the heart of Minoan civilization and the inspiration for one of humanity's most enduring myths, the Labyrinth of the Minotaur. But before the legend, there was a palace unlike any other. Built around 1900 BCE and expanded across centuries, Knossos was not merely a royal residence. It was a sprawling city beneath a single roof. Spanning nearly 150,000 square feet, it housed over 1,000 rooms, light wells, storage chambers, shrines, workshops, and perhaps history's first flushing toilets. It boasted running water, multi-story apartments, and an intricate system for circulating air. This was no crude fortress. It was an architectural marvel. To modern archaeologists, Knossos appears as organized chaos. To ancient visitors, it must have felt like magic. The man who brought Knossos into the light of modern history was British archaeologist Arthur Evans. In the early 1900s, Evans unearthed the site and became convinced it was the birthplace of the Greek labyrinth myth. Its dizzying layout, symbolic architecture, and everywhere he looked, motifs of bulls painted on walls, carved in stone, or fashioned into tiny golden charms. The bull was sacred to the Minoans. Evans even named the civilization after the legendary king Minos. Real or not, Minos' myth became inseparable from these ruins. But here's the twist. No one has found a literal labyrinth. No underground maze, no prison chambers, no half-man monster. What stands before us is something far more mysterious than just ruins. A city built in loops, wings, and layers, deliberately designed to confuse and confound. The deeper you wander into its twisting corridors, the more the boundaries between history and myth begin to blur and fade. So the question lingers, was the Minotaur born from these ancient walls, or was the palace itself the true monster? Knossos doesn't give up its secrets easily, but it knows how to make us ask the questions that matter. The myth is as famous as the crumbling stones, a half-man, half-bull beast trapped within an impossible labyrinth, one so complex that no one who entered it ever found their way out. Only Theseus, the clever hero of Athens, escaped death by slaying the creature, guided by a simple ball of thread and the cunning of Princess Ariadne. But where did this story originate? Why a labyrinth? Early versions speak of King Minos, the powerful ruler of Crete, who demanded from Athens a dark tribute, 7 boys and 7 girls every year. These unfortunate souls were offered to the Minotaur, a creature born of divine wrath and shame. The Minotaur, locked away in a shadowy maze beneath the palace, embodied the savage, brutal core hidden beneath the surface of power and splendor. To the ancient Greeks, Crete was a land of wealth, mystery, and a touch of fear. The Minoans, its seafaring people, were viewed as elegant yet alien. Their rituals involved daring bull leaping, their art depicted strange gods, and their palatial homes were unlike anything on the Greek mainland. For a traveler from 1000 BCE, Knossos might have felt like stepping into another world. The bull was sacred to the Minoans. Frescoes capture young men and women vaulting fearlessly over charging bulls in ritual dances. Stylized bull horns, symbols of consecration, adorned rooftops and altars alike. Layer this sacred reverence over a palace shaped like a labyrinth, and the ingredients for a legend begin to take form. But what if the Minotaur was never just a monster? What if it was a symbol? Some scholars see the myth as a memory of Cretan dominance over the Aegean, a time when Athens was a weaker state forced to pay tribute to a mightier, stranger power. The labyrinth could represent the political trap, the maze of submission and control, and the Minotaur, the raw, terrifying force at the heart of Minoan rule. Others interpret it through a psychological lens, the labyrinth as the unconscious mind's twisting pathways, the Minotaur as the hidden, primal urges lurking within us all. And Theseus, the hero, steps boldly into the shadows, guided only by the fragile thread of memory. Yet the myth remains entwined with Knossos, a palace that stands as the closest glimpse we have ever had of a true labyrinth. No monster lurks here, no Ariadne waiting with her thread, but perhaps something far more profound. Not merely a myth echoing through time, but a history yearning to become myth. Long before Athens raised its gleaming marble temples, before Sparta sharpened its spears, there flourished the Minoan civilization, one of Europe's earliest advanced societies. They ruled not by force or conquest, but through trade, art, and an almost supernatural mastery of architecture. At the heart of their power was Knossos, a palace unlike any throne room. It was a living, breathing hub of culture, ritual, and commerce. From around 2600 to 1400 BCE, the Minoans thrived. Their island of Crete became the center of an extensive trade network reaching Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and distant Spain. Their ships cut silently through the Mediterranean waters like arrows, carrying pottery, saffron, bronze, and precious luxuries. They built no great armies, only bonds. And it was these bonds, more than swords, that made them rich. What strikes us most about Minoan culture is its stark contrast to the later Greeks. Their art celebrates nature, animals, and the fluid grace of human movement, not war or divine wrath. Frescoes reveal dancers swirling, dolphins leaping, athletes vaulting over bulls. Their goddesses were powerful, often bare-breasted, holding snakes, symbols of fertility, transformation, and protection. Knossos itself was no fortress on a hill, but a sprawling complex nestled in a fertile valley. No mighty walls guarded it, suggesting the Minoans felt secure or projected enough power to make defense unnecessary. Their confidence was etched into their architecture, multi-story buildings, columned courtyards, and plumbing systems far ahead of their time. And yet, for all their sophistication, the Minoans left behind no deciphered written records. Their script, Linear A, remains a mystery. We do not know what they called themselves. We do not know their king's prayers or what transpired behind Knossos' walls. All that remains are ruins, art, and a legacy absorbed later by the Mycenaeans, echoing faintly in Greek myth. The Minoans were not just builders of palaces, they were architects of mystery. Knossos was never just a building. It was the pulsing heart of a civilization that shimmered briefly, like sunlight dancing on the Aegean waves, then vanished into legend. Some say its echoes still roam the labyrinthine halls, whispering secrets lost to time. To walk through Knossos is to step through layers of history, confusing, beautiful, alive with the past. It's not just the sheer size that overwhelms you, it's the design itself. Rooms that lead into rooms. Corridors that split, disappear, then reappear. Light wells that pierce the building's core, stairs that spiral into shadow or burst into bright courtyards. Nothing here moves in a straight line. It's no wonder ancient visitors whispered the word labyrinth. But Knossos wasn't merely a palace, it was a living organism. Stretching over 150,000 square feet, its 1,000 chambers, some small, some grand, were carefully planned. Workshops, storage rooms, shrines, apartments, throne rooms, all arranged around a vast central courtyard, a place where public ceremonies and wild bull-leaping rituals might have come alive. The palace rose in layers, 4 or 5 stories tall in places, following the natural slopes of the land, blending stone terraces with human ambition. To find your way, you would need sharp memory, instinct, or a thread like Theseus. Yet beneath this seeming chaos lay extraordinary intelligence. The Minoans mastered passive ventilation, cooling rooms with cleverly designed air shafts and open stairwells. They channeled rainwater through clay pipes, boasting toilets that flushed long before Rome dreamed of plumbing. One of the most iconic spaces is the throne room, named for the alabaster seat built into the wall, flanked by benches for those who might have gathered here. Around it, frescoes of griffins, mythical guardians, stand watch. Was this the seat of a priest-king, a goddess's chamber, a sacred court? No one truly knows. And the walls themselves speak in bursts of color. Vibrant frescoes show dolphins swimming above bathtubs, women in flowing skirts dancing with bare chests, youths soaring mid-leap over bulls. This art was no mere decoration. It was identity, fluid, natural, deeply tied to earth and sea. But the deeper you venture, the more Knossos confounds. Some sections seem deliberately complex, designed to confuse, perhaps the true root of the labyrinth myth. Not a prison for monsters, but a living, breathing palace. A place that inspires awe, ritual, and just enough fear to keep you guessing. No locked doors, no beasts lurking in shadows, just a place that makes you question where you are and what might be waiting just beyond the next corner. Knossos was never simply an administrative center or royal home. It was a sanctuary, an architectural prayer woven from Minoan spirit, myth, and divine mystery. Unlike the towering Greek temples to Zeus or Athena, Knossos' spirituality is subtle, woven into stone and plaster. Shrines hide in corners, whispering sacred rites to those who listen. Pillars rose like sacred sentinels, standing tall and unwavering. Stylized horns, carved and symbolic, adorned rooftops and altars, their presence commanding attention. Everywhere the eye turned, the motif of the bull dominated, a powerful emblem linking worship, the natural world, and this revered creature. The Minoans did not fear the bull, they celebrated it. The famous bull-leaping fresco at Knossos was far more than a display of athletic skill. It may have represented a sacred rite, young men and women vaulting over a charging bull, locked in a perilous dance of danger and grace. This was no mere sport. It was ritual theater, perhaps an offering to the gods or a symbolic triumph over chaos itself. Beneath the palace, hidden in storerooms, were the snake goddess figurines, among the most iconic relics of Minoan culture. Bare-breasted, arms raised, serpents coiled around their bodies or held firmly in their hands, these figures radiated authority and power. They were not submissive idols, but guardians of the household, fertility, and possibly life itself. To the Minoans, snakes symbolized renewal, rebirth, and mystery, creatures bridging earth and the underworld. The rooms that sheltered these artifacts hinted at household shrines or ritual spaces, quiet, sacred corners nestled deep within the bustling heart of the palace. Together with the frescoes, the horns, the altars, and the labyrinthine corridors, the entire complex began to feel like a ritual machine, a structure designed not simply for living, but for communion with the divine. There was no centralized temple at Knossos because the palace itself was a temple. Its very layout, its art, and its design were manifestations of a spiritual worldview where the boundaries between sacred and secular dissolved. This was a place where myth became architecture, where a corridor might serve as a passage to the gods, and where every whisper echoing in stone chambers could have been a prayer. Knossos was not merely a home for people, it was a home for gods. For centuries, Knossos stood as a beacon of prosperity, innovation, and cultural sophistication. But then something happened, something sudden, something that defies full explanation. By around 1400 BCE, the palace was abandoned, its frescoes left to fade, and the Minoan civilization that once ruled the seas vanished like mist drifting over the Aegean. So what happened? What happened? Theories abound. Some point to nature's fury. Around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, erupted in one of the largest explosions in human history. The blast was so massive, it likely triggered tsunamis that pummeled Crete's northern coast, devastating ports and farmland. Ash clouds may have blocked the sun, choking crops and unsettling the climate. While Knossos wasn't destroyed immediately, the eruption's aftermath probably shook its foundations, economically, politically, and spiritually. Some point to war as a cause. By 1450 BCE, the rising power of the Mycenaeans, mainland Greeks, may have exploited Minoan weakness. Archaeological evidence suggests Knossos was briefly reoccupied, but the culture had transformed. The art grew more martial. Linear A, the Minoan script, was replaced by Linear B, the language of Mycenaean scribes. The palace that once thrived with snake goddesses and bull dancers now whispered in a foreign tongue. Some scholars believe the Mycenaeans didn't conquer in a single stroke, but gradually absorbed the island, first through trade, then influence, and finally rule. Others argue that internal collapse, civil uprisings, political instability, or elite failure contributed just as much. What stands out is the surprising lack of violence in the ruins. No charred skeletons, no signs of mass slaughter. Knossos didn't fall with a scream, it fell with a whisper. The great palatial system simply stopped. The rooms fell silent. Rituals ceased, and nature slowly reclaimed its place. By the time Homer sang of Crete in his epics, Knossos was already ancient myth, a memory tangled in stories of kings, monsters, and labyrinths. Perhaps fittingly, what destroyed Knossos wasn't just eruption or invasion. It was time, and the way all great things, no matter how magnificent, eventually fade beneath the weight of new empires. But the bones remain. And if you listen closely, the maze still hums beneath the earth. For thousands of years, Knossos lay buried beneath Cretan soil, just another mound of stone lost to time. Its name forgotten, its myths distorted, its walls swallowed by olive groves and dust, until one man chose to chase a legend. His name was Sir Arthur Evans, and he didn't just rediscover Knossos, he reimagined it. In 1900, Evans, a British archaeologist with a flair for drama and a deep love for Homeric myth, purchased the land covering the ancient ruins. Local farmers had been uncovering strange seals and artifacts, silent whispers hinting that something vast and extraordinary lay hidden beneath their very feet. Evans began to dig, and what he uncovered would forever alter the story of the Aegean. He revealed a palace so immense, so intricate, and so astonishingly advanced that he became convinced it was the legendary home of King Minos. The frescoes, the sacred horns, the uncanny architecture, all pointed in his mind to one profound truth: the labyrinth. But Evans was more than an archaeologist. He was a storyteller, sometimes a contentious one. He named the builders the Minoans after Minos himself. He interpreted enigmatic symbols, painstakingly reconstructed frescoes, and restored parts of the palace using reinforced concrete, a choice that sparked both admiration and harsh criticism. Some hailed his vision, others condemned it as desecration. Because what stands today at Knossos is part ancient ruin, part Edwardian imagination. Yet Evans did what none before dared. He breathed life back into Knossos. He offered Europe a window into a Bronze Age civilization far older than classical Greece, a world of art, mystery, and maritime mastery. He also uncovered the still undeciphered Linear A script, opening new mysteries about language, literacy, and the limits of human knowledge. But Evans did more than unearth stones. He resurrected a myth and compelled historians to face the truth that beneath the labyrinth legend lay something real, complex, profoundly human, a palace that was itself a maze, a civilization fading into shadow, and a man who peeled back the earth only to discover a story far stranger and more beautiful than he had ever imagined. Knossos had slept for 3 millennia. Evans rang the bell that woke it. To walk through Knossos is not merely to pass through walls and halls, it is to walk through a language of symbols. Frescoes, carvings, patterns, they cover every surface. But the Minoans left no Rosetta Stone. Their primary script, Linear A, remains an undeciphered mystery. So instead of reading their thoughts, we must see them painted on plaster, carved into stone, and hidden in every pattern. What were they trying to tell us? The art of Knossos is unlike anything in the ancient world. There's no obsession with warfare, no rows of kings or battle-hardened heroes. Instead, we find nature, leaping dolphins, blooming lilies, birds in flight, and sacred bulls. The humans are alive, elegant, and often dancing or performing rituals. Even in scenes that suggest danger, there's rhythm and beauty. The Minoans weren't chronicling conquests. They were celebrating life cycles and possibly cosmic order. The most iconic symbol, though, is the double axe, or labrys, found throughout Knossos in shrines, on frescoes, even etched into stones. The double axe is believed to be a religious symbol, possibly tied to female divinity or celestial cycles. Some suggest the very word labyrinth might derive from labrys, making the labyrinth not a maze at all, but a house of the double axe, a sacred space, not a trap. Then there are the horns of consecration, stylized bull horns placed atop walls and altars. These may have been religious markers, separating sacred space from the mundane. Combined with frequent depictions of bulls and bull-leaping rituals, it's clear the animal had deep spiritual significance. Whether it represented nature, fertility, chaos, or a divine presence, no one agrees. But the bull is everywhere. Even the layout of Knossos may have symbolic meaning. Some archaeologists believe it was built not just for function, but to mirror celestial or seasonal patterns. Its winding corridors and nested rooms could represent a journey through life, through death, through the underworld, a spiritual maze, not a physical prison. But without a deciphered script, every theory walks a thin line between insight and imagination. The Minoans spoke in symbols, not stories, and so we're left to interpret. What is Knossos saying? We hear the rhythms, we see the images, but the meaning remains just out of reach, like a thread unraveling into myth. Knossos is a ruin, yes, but it doesn't feel dead. Walk its corridors today and you'll sense something humming just beneath the surface. Not ghosts, not gods, but echoes of myths, of lives, of questions that refuse to go away. Thousands of years after its fall, Knossos still holds us in its maze. Tourists wander its halls, archaeologists dig for answers, and writers spin new tales inspired by its shadow. The Minotaur may be myth, but the feeling of the labyrinth is real. We don't know who ruled Knossos. We don't know the names of its kings, queens, or priests. We don't know the prayers they whispered or the laws they lived by. But we know they loved beauty. We know they worshipped nature. We know they understood balance between architecture and art, between ritual and reality. And we know they were the first. Before the Parthenon, before Rome, before the Hebrew temples or the Persian palaces, there was Knossos, a palace that was also a city that was also a temple that may have also been a story. Because perhaps that's what the labyrinth really is. Not a prison, not a puzzle, but a narrative carved in stone, a myth in architectural form. The legend of the Minotaur didn't arise from nothing. It came from this place, from the confusion of its corridors, the reverence of its bull rituals, and the awe it inspired in generations who tried to make sense of it. The Greeks turned it into a story. We turned it into archaeology. But at its core, Knossos has always been both. Today, we can walk its ruins in broad daylight, we can take photos, draw maps, and even reconstruct its frescoes. But the mystery hasn't vanished. The line between fact and legend still shimmers like heat over stone. Maybe that's why Knossos endures, because it doesn't give us all the answers. It reminds us that sometimes history isn't meant to be solved, it's meant to be felt. And Knossos, ancient, tangled, half-remembered, isn't just a place on a map, it's a question, one that leads us deeper with every step. And like Theseus, we're all still following the thread. Ancient engineers knew exactly what they were doing. The earliest rams were handheld. Teams of soldiers simply lifted a tree trunk and smashed it against enemy defenses like frenzied lumberjacks. But over time, the battering ram evolved. Engineers realized that mounting the ram inside a wheeled frame, often with a roof to protect the crew from arrows and boiling oil, turned it from a tool into a weapon of terror. The Assyrians, masters of siege warfare, turned rams into psychological weapons. Their siege towers combined rams with archer platforms, meaning a city's gates were being destroyed while defenders were under constant fire. Relief carvings from Nineveh show rams with pointed iron tips rolling up to the gates of rebellious cities like slow-moving gods of destruction. And it wasn't just the front door they were smashing. Rams were often used to breach weak points in walls, batter down watchtowers, or collapse gates entirely. Their presence meant one thing: surrender, or watch your defenses crumble like stale bread. The Greeks refined them, the Romans perfected them. Roman engineers crafted massive rams called ares, Latin for ram, suspended by chains or ropes inside enormous siege shelters. Some were so colossal they required dozens of men to operate. The steady rhythm of their swinging beams was said to echo like thunder rolling over stone. Yet, for all their brute force, battering rams demanded intense teamwork. Operators had to keep the ram swinging in perfect sync while also defending it against burning missiles, stones, and all manner of foul substances hurled from above. A stalled ram was a dead ram. Still, when a battering ram gained momentum, really gained momentum, it became unstoppable. Wooden muscle clashing against human masonry. It was ancient physics, weaponized, and it was only the beginning of how engineers would make walls weep. If the battering ram was the brute, the catapult was the tactician. While rams smashed up close, catapults attacked from a distance, launching not just stones, but psychological dread. They were the first true artillery in military history, revolutionizing siege warfare by weaponizing physics in ways that felt almost magical to their enemies. The earliest catapults appeared in the Greek world around the 4th century BCE, born from brilliant minds intent on adding range and momentum to warfare. Dionysius the Elder of Syracuse, a tyrant with a taste for cutting-edge violence, commissioned the first torsion-powered catapults, machines that used tightly twisted bundles of sinew or hair as tension springs. These were no mere giant slingshots, they were precise instruments of siege terror. The genius lay in their mechanics. Engineers realized that by twisting ropes, often made from animal sinew, tightly, they could store immense potential energy. When released, this force could hurl stones, javelins, or flaming projectiles hundreds of meters. Two main types quickly evolved: the ballista, launching massive bolts like a giant crossbow, and the stone-throwing catapult, lobbing boulders over walls or directly at fortifications. Then came the Romans, who never encountered a Greek idea they couldn't improve. They built catapults that could be broken down, packed onto carts, and reassembled on site, portable siege engines for professional armies. Some Roman catapults could fire 60-pound stones at incredible speeds, capable of tearing through wooden gates, battlements, and sometimes unlucky soldiers. But catapults were about more than destruction. They were a spectacle. Ancient generals used them to send messages, sometimes literally. Corpses were hurled over walls to spread disease and terror. Severed heads were flung into besieged cities to crush morale. In one chilling example, diseased bodies were launched into enemy lands as an early form of biological warfare. Catapults had their weaknesses. They were cumbersome, needed expert crews to operate, and rough terrain could render them useless. Yet when properly set up, they could pound a city into submission from a safe distance. For the first time in history, cities understood that thick stone walls weren't just built to withstand battering rams, they had to defend against attacks from the sky. Because now, destruction flew through the air. If the catapult was clever, the trebuchet was majestic, towering, creaking, and fearsome. It stood as the undisputed monarch of medieval siege warfare. When a trebuchet appeared on the battlefield, it wasn't merely a weapon, it was a declaration. Your walls mean nothing. Unlike its tension-powered relatives, the trebuchet harnessed gravity. Its design was elegantly simple, a long swinging arm mounted on a sturdy frame with a heavy counterweight on one end and a sling on the other. Raise the weight, release it, and the arm would whip forward, launching its deadly cargo in a high arc over enemy defenses. It was controlled destruction, precise, reliable, and devastating. The trebuchet's roots trace back to early traction versions used by the Chinese as early as the 4th century BCE, where manpower replaced the counterweight. But the counterweight trebuchet, the game changer that reshaped siege warfare across Europe and the Islamic world, emerged in the 12th century, likely introduced via Byzantine or Muslim intermediaries. Once Europe acquired the design, it spread rapidly through castles and crusades alike. Its power was staggering. A well-crafted trebuchet could hurl 300-pound projectiles over 300 meters. Stones as large as furniture would smash into towers, shatter walls, and crush enemy morale. But the real marvel lay in its arc. Unlike catapults, trebuchets could gracefully send projectiles over walls. This meant they weren't merely demolishing defenses, they were targeting courtyards, barracks, and supply depots within. And it wasn't just stones. Trebuchets hurled everything. Diseased carcasses, burning pitch, pots of lime to blind defenders, even messages or insults wrapped around rocks. One legendary story from the siege of Stirling Castle in Scotland tells of Warwolf, a trebuchet so colossal the enemy surrendered before it even fired. Yet the king refused to accept surrender, just to witness the machine's might firsthand. Despite its awe-inspiring destruction, the trebuchet was not swift. It took hours to construct, minutes to reload, and demanded the skill of expert engineers. Still, no other siege weapon combined range, raw force, and psychological terror quite like the siege tower. It was the medieval version of a slow-motion hammer sent from the heavens. And when that massive counterweight finally dropped, entire cities seemed to hold their breath in dread. While catapults launched deadly projectiles from afar and battering rams relentlessly smashed gates, siege towers took the fight straight to the enemy's doorstep. Rolling forward like colossal wooden skyscrapers on wheels, their surfaces slick with wet hides to resist fire, bristling with archers and spearmen ready to unleash devastation. This was no mere machine. It was an ancient hybrid, part armored personnel carrier, part mobile fortress. When one of these lumbering giants rumbled toward your city walls, you knew the true battle was about to begin. Siege towers were anything but subtle. They were huge, audacious, and terrifyingly effective when wielded by those who knew their power. The Assyrians pioneered their use back in the 9th century BCE, but it was the Greeks, especially the Hellenistic kingdoms, who pushed siege tower design to dramatic extremes. Take the siege of Rhodes in 305 BCE, for example. The Macedonian general Demetrius constructed a towering 9-story behemoth called the Helepolis, or Taker of Cities. Standing over 100 feet tall, armored with iron plates and powered by thousands of soldiers, it was a terrifying vision of war. Though it eventually collapsed under its own immense weight, its ambition was unmatched. The principle behind siege towers was simple but deadly. Walls only protect you if no one can climb over them. Siege towers nullified that advantage by providing a high, mobile platform, allowing attackers to pour directly onto the battlements, bypassing gates and ladders alike. From the top deck, archers rained arrows down upon defenders below, while warriors on the lower levels prepared to storm the walls. But siege towers were not invincible. Slow and vulnerable, they could get bogged down in mud and became prime targets for defenders wielding fire arrows, rolling boulders, and sabotage. Savvy defenders dug ditches, flooded moats, or erected secondary walls, counterscarp defenses, just to halt a tower's advance. Still, when siege towers succeeded, they did so spectacularly. A breach in the wall was one thing, but suddenly seeing your own ramparts swarming with enemy soldiers, that was pure chaos. Siege towers transformed the battlefield from a horizontal struggle of strength into a vertical race for survival. They turned height into both a deadly advantage and a terrifying vulnerability. Once the gangplank dropped from the siege tower onto the city walls, there was no turning back. It was time for hand-to-hand hell. While rams smashed and trebuchets hurled massive stones, some of the most devastating tactics unfolded silently, underground. Siege tunneling, or sapping, was the dark art of defeating a city by literally removing the ground beneath it. The idea was ancient and horrifyingly effective. Dig beneath the enemy's wall, prop it up with wooden supports, then set those timbers on fire. When the supports burned away, the tunnel collapsed, taking the wall's foundation with it. One moment, your city stood strong. The next, a massive section of the outer wall crumbled like stale bread. This method didn't look glorious. There were no thunderous engines or grand displays, but tunneling was the slow, invisible killer of fortress warfare. The Assyrians practiced early forms of it, but the technique matured fully with the Greeks, Persians, and later medieval European armies. During the siege of Plataea in 429 BCE, the Spartans attempted tunneling beneath the walls, only for defenders to dig counter tunnels and intercept them mid-dig, turning the soil into a nightmare of knife fights. This defensive tactic, known as countermining, added an eerie dimension to siege warfare. Imagine soldiers digging blindly in pitch black hundreds of feet underground, straining to hear the enemy's picks. The moment they caught the faint tapping, they'd race to intercept, often erupting into brutal, claustrophobic skirmishes fought by torchlight with knives and shovels. There was no glory in it, only terror, suffocation, and choking dirt. But when undermining worked, the results were catastrophic. One infamous example came in 1212 during the siege of Rochester Castle in England. King John's forces tunneled beneath the southern wall, packed the mine with pig fat, and set it ablaze. The supports collapsed, bringing down the entire tower above. The defenders were stunned and soon after surrendered. By the 13th century, siege engineers became specialists. They could identify weak foundations, analyze soil behavior, and plan collapses with terrifying precision. They were geologists and demolitionists rolled into one. And though tunneling required time, labor, and a bit of madness, it proved one unchanging truth of siege warfare. If you couldn't go over the wall and you couldn't go through it, you could always take it down from below. Not all the drama of siege warfare came from the attackers. For every ram built or tower pushed forward, defenders had their own deadly arsenal of tricks, and sometimes those tricks were scorching. Let's begin with the most terrifying of all, Greek fire. Created by the Byzantines around the 7th century CE, Greek fire was a mysterious napalm-like substance that clung fiercely to ships, walls, and flesh, burning relentlessly even on water. Sprayed through siphons or hurled in clay pots, it unleashed scenes of utter chaos and terror. To this day, its exact formula remains a mystery, lost forever when the Byzantine Empire fell. But its impact? Legendary. Entire fleets were reduced to blazing skeletons within moments, and that was just the beginning. In more primitive defenses, boiling liquids were the weapons of choice. Boiling water, oil, or sand poured through murder holes. Small openings in the ceilings of gateways or towers would drench invaders below in scalding fury. Oil was especially feared. Unlike water, it clung to skin and armor, seeping in before bursting into flames. Imagine scaling a siege ladder only to be greeted by a fire that no water could quench. Hot sand, though less dramatic, was just as cruel. It slipped into the smallest cracks in armor, around necks and wrists, inflicting agonizing second and third-degree burns as it cooked the flesh beneath. From afar, it might not seem impressive, but up close, it turned fearless warriors into shrieking wrecks in seconds. Defenders also wielded the laws of physics as weapons. Gravity became a tool of destruction. Giant stones, heavy logs, even dead animals were dropped from parapets onto siege engines or clustered troops below. The goal wasn't just to kill, it was to shatter machines and morale in one brutal strike. Then came the traps. Hidden pits, collapsing bridges, spiked barricades. Castles became elaborate puzzles of pain, designed to slow, confuse, and punish. All of this served one clear purpose: delay. Every minute a wall held meant the enemy's supply lines grew thin, disease festered in their camps, and reinforcements could arrive. Siege warfare was a relentless game of attrition. While attackers harnessed physics, defenders relied on creativity and a boiling, unyielding rage. In siege warfare, raw destruction was only half the battle. The other half was psychological domination, breaking the defender's will before the walls ever fell. Siege weapons were not mere tools of war. They were colossal, creaking, flaming symbols of doom. Every groaning wheel of a siege tower, every soaring boulder launched by a trebuchet carried a single terrifying message to those behind the walls: you are not safe. Ancient commanders understood the power of siege warfare as both strategy and spectacle. The Assyrians paraded their siege engines openly, dragging massive war machines across arid deserts with grand fanfare. A show of might meant to intimidate even before the first stone was thrown. The Romans took this spectacle further, erecting their siege camps squarely in enemy sight, allowing defenders to witness battering rams assembled and catapults tested, an open declaration of impending doom. Siege warfare was theater, and fear was woven deeply into its script. Sometimes the weapons themselves carried a chilling message. Severed heads of enemy messengers or generals, often still clad in armor, were hurled over walls, a gruesome warning. At the Siege of Constantinople, defenders faced not just stones, but bodies, diseased corpses flung to spread panic and plague. Centuries later, during the Mongol siege of Kaffa in 1346, tossing plague-infected cadavers over the walls is believed to have sown the seeds of the Black Death's catastrophic spread across Europe. The trebuchet was more than a weapon, it was an announcement. When one of these towering machines was rolled into position, every soul inside the fortress could hear it long before they saw it. The creaking of winches, the grinding ropes, the heavy thunk of the counterweight, a pulse like the ominous heartbeat of a gathering storm. But the deadliest weapon of all was the unknown. No one could predict what would come next. A crushing rock, a barrel of fire, a hailstorm of arrows, or nothing but a heavy, suffocating silence as engineers carefully adjusted their aim. Even sound became a psychological weapon. The relentless thump of the battering ram, or the sudden hush before a shot, gnawed at defenders' nerves, driving them toward madness and despair. For commanders, the ultimate goal was to shatter the enemy's will, to convince them resistance was futile, that their gods had abandoned them, and that their walls were no more than temporary obstacles on the inevitable path of fate. When that mental dam finally broke, the gates often swung open without a fight. Because in siege warfare, sometimes the mind collapses before the walls. With the thunder of gunpowder echoing across late medieval battlefields, the era of traditional siege engines slowly splintered and faded. But their legacy did not vanish, it transformed. The invention of cannons revolutionized warfare. A single, well-aimed cannonball could achieve in seconds what a trebuchet labored for hours to accomplish. Stone walls, once thought impenetrable, became liabilities. By the 15th century, Europe's grand castles crumbled, not from fire or undermining, but from iron balls smashing through parapets. Siege warfare entered a new phase, explosive, brutal, deafening. Yet the core principles laid down by ancient siege engineers endured. Modern artillery still owes a deep debt to the catapult and trebuchet. Every ballistic missile and long-range howitzer is a high-tech descendant of the same ancient question: how do you break what's meant to be unbreakable from a distance? Physics, trajectory, tension, and force, all discovered, tested, and perfected centuries before gunpowder ever entered the story. Even modern military psychology, shock and awe, overwhelming firepower, visible dominance, has its roots deep in ancient siege tactics. Those towering siege engines rolling forward with flags snapping in the wind were the original shock and awe. They weren't just tools to breach walls. They were weapons designed to break the spirit of a city. You can still see their legacy etched into the ruins of ancient cities. At Masada, where Roman siege ramps scar the desert floor. At Constantinople, where layers of walls stood for 1,000 years against every imaginable machine, until cannon fire finally brought them down. At castles scattered across Europe, where round towers and angled bastions tell the story of a world constantly redesigning itself to survive the next siege. And today, even in a world of drones and satellite-guided missiles, siege warfare hasn't vanished. It's just gone digital. Cities are still surrounded, defenders remain isolated, walls now take the form of firewalls, blockades, or even media blackouts. But the soul of the siege remains unchanged. Someone wants in, someone wants to keep them out, and both are willing to wait, build, and break to win. The battering rams are gone, the trebuchets are museum pieces, but the spirit of siege warfare, it's as alive and as destructive as ever. As we wrap up the story of Knossos and this journey into a mysterious civilization, how do you feel? Has the unveiling of these secrets sparked your curiosity and fascination as it has ours? If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you won't miss out on more exciting content. And remember to send warm, good night wishes to everyone